It's the most important story, in my understanding, in British politics in our lifetimes. I think it will have a far greater impact in the long term than Brexit, for instance, which everyone has thought was the biggest issue of the last decade. And the fact that Elon Musk has forced this back to public attention and is essentially looks like he's going to hold the government and indeed the entire bureaucracy, the police, the Home Office, everybody to account is astonishing.
How do you think Elon Musk is transforming British politics?
Well, thank you, Stephen. It's great to be here. And the first thing I would say is this couldn't have happened without digital technology and social media, and new media in particular. So we are in an uncharted waters, really. People had opinions before about other countries, but they didn't circulate and they didn't have an instant effect of this kind. Musk's opinion has dynamited British politics more than once, in that he's able to engage in front of millions of people and to force a response from government ministers. And intervening in the case of the grooming and rape gangs scandal is only the latest. And in effect, elected politicians in Britain and also the bureaucracy are now accountable to one of the world's richest people. And the question is whether this is for the good now and whether it might be for the good or bad in future with a different person in that position.
Do you think that the Labour Party and Keir Starmer are concerned or should be concerned about Elon Musk's influence in British politics?
I think they're very concerned. I think they're more concerned about this than the previous Conservative governments were, because the Labour Party is a control freak organisation which, as we've seen, is already determined to suppress the speech and objections of the British public on issues where it believes that these are settled issues and there can be no negotiation. For instance, mass immigration, Islamism, terrorism, and so on. That's obviously not the case in the British public's eyes, and social media has become the forum in which the public expresses its dissatisfaction. And of course that connects it globally. So the only way the Labour Party can control this debate in the way that, say, in the old days you could control the debate through the BBC and a few newspapers, the only way the Labour Party can do that is by turning off the internet or legislating to suppress people's right to speak their minds online.
In terms of the political influence that Elon Musk is having, can you just assess whether that's on the grooming gangs issue or helping reform UK? How is he impacting British politics?
Well, if he's able to donate to Reform UK on the scale that he's talking about donating, and if he's allowed to, which is pretty much what it'll come down to, then this will revolutionise British politics and drive it much closer to the American-style model, where a vast amount of money can be funneled into political campaigns. We're already drifting that way anyway, but this would send it over the edge. Labour's problem, of course, is how to stop him doing it without also making it illegal to get millions of pounds from the unions, who of course are their main backers. That in itself is an example of this. As for the grooming gangs in particular, this was an issue that governments of both Labour and Conservatives and the Home Office and the police seem to have thought that they could kick to one side. They thought they had buried it. In large part, the media did the shovel work. Most of the media was simply not interested in pursuing this story as enthusiastically as it pursued, say, Boris Johnson's love life. It's the most important story, in my understanding, in British politics in our lifetimes. I think it will have a far greater impact in the long term than Brexit, for instance, which everyone has thought was the biggest issue of the last decade. And the fact that Elon Musk has forced this back to public attention and is essentially looks like he's going to hold the government and indeed the entire bureaucracy, the police, the Home Office, everybody to account is astonishing. And the effect of this, I think, is going to be accelerating political changes which are already underway and may well, I think, lead to a complete transformation in British politics, which is, as I said, is already underway. The rise of reform, the collapse of the support for the traditional big two parties. Musk has effectively pushed this forward, and I think he'll have the same transformative effect as indeed he's had on the Republican Party in the US.
And do you think that the Labour Party line that some ministers are coming out, that Musk should focus on America, which is his own country, and essentially that he's in some, they're saying he's spreading disinformation and so on. Do you think that line will hold? Will that be enough to deflect the criticism?
Well, it's a bit rich, isn't it? Because, I mean, the United States and the Trump administration is very much on the Labour government's mind. They are looking at a free trade deal with the US as a lifeline for an economy which otherwise they seem to be determined to drive into a ditch. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and what this really means is they just don't like what he's saying. In the same way as between 2017 and 2020, most European politicians didn't like what Donald Trump said. Of course, in the long term, they have got used to it, and even now their wisdom in 2025 is what he was saying nearly a decade ago. And I suspect something similar is going to happen on the grooming gangs issue.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it's suddenly getting international and particularly American attention, where in years past, perhaps there hasn't really been this international focus. Why do you think this is happening now? This scandal's been going on for more than, well, really since the 1970s. Why is this suddenly getting American attention?
2 words is Elon Musk. Simply that. The man possessed of this enormously powerful megaphone, this huge soapbox, is on it and taking part in the debates like any other member of X, formerly Twitter, which is in itself is hilarious. It's like the Roman emperor going through the streets in disguise and mingling, with the peasants in the market. I think it's a good thing. I don't think Keir Starmer would dare show his face anywhere near the British public, given how unpopular he is now. And I think, so as I said, I think it's a positive thing that Musk is doing it, but then I like quite a lot of what he says. I probably wouldn't feel the same if it was somebody who wasn't as prepared as Musk is to go against the consensus and is suspicious of what in America they call the deep state. In Britain, they don't talk about the deep state so much. They just talk about a state which is falling apart and has, as I said, a control freak problem. At the moment, he is against it, and that's an excellent thing. Britain is a country which is sort of paralyzed and incompetent, and Musk is a sort of tech inventor. He looks at a problem set. And this, I believe, is why free speech matters so much to him. And it's not just because he is an American by adoption and so is aware of what it means. Scientific ideas develop by trial and error. In other words, making the wrong hypothesis in public. In politics, that is free speech. You believe in that things can be argued out, that by airing positions, differences, we arrive at the truth, or even at the best policy. So I think for Musk, it's not just a matter of free speech, it's an entire worldview. And I think he's completely correct when he looks at Britain, which, historically, like many Americans on the right, he understands as the mother of the American system and the rights of American people. When he looks at Britain, he sees a country where the government and the police and the bureaucracy as well are doing their best to suppress free speech, and that ends up in a miserable country, but also a dumb country. And it's in nobody's interest for Britain to become a miserable and dumb place, which is what it's drifting into.
More broadly, why do you think this grooming gangs or rape gangs issue has been so unexamined? There's been so much sort of disinterest in it from many parts of the country, the media, the establishment for so many years. And it's bizarre, isn't it, that it takes an American and Americans to shine a huge light on this issue. I know that there has been some individual reporters over the years who've done fantastic work exposing it, individual MPs and so on. But why do you think for so long it's just been under the radar?
I think this is because of snobbery in its old forms and new. The old form of snobbery holds that the miseries of largely white, largely working class or underclass girls in ugly and unfashionable northern towns are really not that important. When people talk about the London media and the metropolitan bubble, that's basically what that means. And it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the getting of power, except, of course, in cultivating a voter base. And if you have a crime which the police confirm has been heavily committed by people of Pakistani background, well, that's your voter base. You're not going to want to disturb that. And that is the newer form of snobbery, in a way, which is political correctness. The idea that pointing out that mass immigration might not be an unconditional, wonderful thing for everybody has become a kind of heresy, or was, in fact, until Donald Trump made it acceptable to say. And we are now seeing Elon Musk making it acceptable to talk about the downsides of mass immigration, for instance. Again, this was not an acceptable thing. It was not politically correct. And the one thing I do notice in the British media is that they are conformists generally, and they are very class conscious. They're very proud of their connections to politicians and to power, as journalists everywhere tend to be. And so they have no real incentive to go too deeply into a story, which may make them look, bad guys in a way.
Elon Musk may be creating problems for Nigel Farage, political problems, because some of his tweets have been a bit, I don't know, he's particularly supporting Tommy Robinson, but I'm talking about other tweets as well, where maybe he uses a bit of hyperbole, or he doesn't quite understand an issue, and he kind of retweets accounts which are pretty inaccurate in some cases. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So how does Nigel Farage sort of deal with this problem of Musk kind of retweeting mad stuff, and also his support for Tommy Robinson, whatever you think about the man?
Well, there are two things there. One of them is this, and Musk is not the first person to be retweeting idiots and bigots on the internet and generally acting as lol is his buzzword. That is the default nature of internet politics. And we've seen over the last 10, 15 years attempts to exclude people from taking part in politics because this is what they do in their evenings. I'm not sure if it's as big a problem now as it would have been before Trump's election in 2016. I think most of us, unless I'm being particularly jaded and spending too much time online, which is of course possible, I think most of us understand that the way that people behave online is not reality, and that these displays, regrettable and distasteful that they frequently are not necessarily the full measure of the person. And Musk is a remarkable person for all of those oddities of personality and drawbacks and a kind of tendency to be crass and, shoot from the hip and so on. Is that a problem for Farage? Yes, because British politics is much more polite than American politics, for a start. And it's easier to exclude Farage on those grounds. As for Tommy Robinson, Robinson has broken the law in Britain. There's no doubt about that, and people who break the law deserve to be punished. I think, like most people, I would say anybody who breaks the law should be punished. People like Elon Musk will look at it and say, well, this is blatant two-tier justice system. You have a system where people are given jail sentences for making rude tweets, but rapists and traffickers appear to have been able to operate for years with impunity. You have a situation where Tommy Robinson, as I said, breaks the law and says rude things and ends up in solitary confinement. This does also, to me, seem like an unequal application of justice. I would be very happy if anyone who broke the law was prosecuted by the law to its fullest. I think that to Musk, somebody like Tommy Robinson could become a regular American politician, because American politics is much more rough and tumble. In England, the political class looks at Tommy Robinson like a pleb who has got ideas above his station. The fact is, if Tommy Robinson had been to the same private school as Nigel Farage, he would probably be a respectable politician by now, and would talk differently and act differently. The actual content of what Tommy Robinson has said is not so different from the actual content of what many people, including Nigel Farage, has said. Some of the things that Tommy Robinson has said are now said by Keir Starmer, strangely enough.
So it is a class thing to do with Tommy Robinson. And it's interesting, he does have a lot of supporters. They go out to these marches and millions of people seem to like him. And he does come from that very working class background. Do you think that Americans just don't see that class distinction in the same way? I mean, it's so interesting seeing someone like Jordan Peterson interview Tommy Robinson. To Americans and Canadians, I suppose, he's a very mainstream figure. He's, but in Britain, he's like toxic goods.
He is now. Give him another 5 or 10 years, and I think we'll see a quite different situation, at least on present trends. I think that's true. Americans are by nature democratic people, and the British, I have to say, are by nature very, very class-bound. It is the weak spot, the Achilles heel of British life. Talented people are driven out or patronised or simply ignored, and all too often, untalented people with the right connections float to the top. If you look at the line-up of the leadership of the Conservative Party in recent years, it's very clear that a kind of insider trading in reputations still goes on. People like Tommy Robinson in particular disrupt that. They break that up. Some of the most popular politicians in British history have also been outsiders. Benjamin Disraeli, Margaret Thatcher. These were not obvious political class people. So I don't think it should be an obstacle. I do think that Robinson should be more careful and avoid breaking the law, because the more he does it, the less chance he will have of having a major impact. From my encounters with him, I thought he seemed quite an intelligent person who'd simply had enough. And was going at politics in a very, very crude way. Again, in the United States, that's more acceptable. In Britain, that's a red card offence from the off.
And do you think that he's done more harm than good? I know that some people today have been accusing him of essentially making the issue of grooming gangs tied with the so-called far right, because he was in the English Defence League and you had these kind of...
Well, he was in the BNP, wasn't he, before, as a teenager? I mean, he's repented, but I believe he was, in the active racist right. That was his entry into politics. So, well, that's a good question. At the moment, you could argue he has. I think in the long run he won't. What Tommy Robinson has done is forced onto the agenda and found a way of internationalising this issue, which, as I said, if the British authorities had got their way, and indeed much of the British media as well, it would never have got onto the national agenda, let alone the international one. Again, with the exceptions of the few journalists you mentioned. If you look at it from the American point of view, Robinson is a tremendous success. He's globalised what I think might become the key issue in British politics in the next electoral cycle. At home, he perhaps assumes that everyone hates him and he doesn't care.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.